I want to introduce to you now a young lady who has become very special in our counseling center. Debbie has been, or had been, a client of ours for several years, and we've invited her to come and share her story. We normally have a videotape version, but Debbie's so polished she could just do this on a whim. This is Debbie Morrison.
I'm going to read from notes a little bit so that I don't run long, because I know you don't want to be here all night long. So like Michael said, my name is Debbie. He's very tall. And I'm going to start with some words from the Apostle Paul. When he wrote a letter to the Romans, he said, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is." Typically, when we hear that, we think about how we're supposed to live according to a certain set of rules or values that are godlike. But I've learned that the impact of the thoughts in our mind actually have so much more damage, it can do so much more damage than just actions that we have. I grew up in what seemed like a normal home. If you looked at it from the outside, everything was typical. I had a father who went to work every day. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was there all day. I had two brothers who picked on me constantly. That's pretty normal stuff. And the outside world looked at that and thought we were a normal family. But what the outside world didn't see was that my mother was a drug addict. I would learn later on in my life that she suffered from untreated severe and chronic depression, and that she was not a first-generation sufferer of that. Her father also suffered from that as well, and so did her grandmother. And she would never overcome that. She died still struggling with that. It caused her to be distant and emotionally unavailable. She was in the room with us often, but she had no idea what was going on. She didn't engage or interact with my brothers and I. And that caused my father to behave differently as well. He would distance himself from the family. He would keep busy and try to keep moving so that he didn't have to deal with the struggles that were happening in the home. That happened first, and then eventually he distanced himself physically, and he moved 700 miles from our hometown. By the time we were teenagers, my brothers and I had been rejected repeatedly and finally abandoned by our parents. And so those seeds of unworthiness were spread, and they just started to grow inside me. And I never felt good enough, and I never felt like I could live up to the expectation. I was always a disappointment no matter how hard I tried. I was insecure, and I was constantly afraid that I would be even more rejected as I went on. I battled suicide by the time I was in high school, but I managed to pull through that barely. And a few years later, I got married. I saw red flags in the man that I was getting ready to marry, but I dismissed them because I just wanted security. This was finally somebody that wasn't rejecting me. He wanted to be with me, so I set aside all those red flags that I saw just for the sake of stability. And I became pregnant quickly, again, looking for something to hold on to. From the beginning, this man tore me down emotionally. No matter what I did, he always found fault. He criticized. It could always be better. I couldn't do it right, and why couldn't I get it right? I was a stay-at-home mom, so I didn't have income, and so there was no value there. There was no value from my job, from performance evaluations and that sort of thing. There was just this constant criticism that reinforced that behavior I'd already learned as a child. He made me feel like it was a privilege to stay home and that he was affording that, and I should be more appreciative of him. So I didn't, but he never actually touched me. He never physically hit me. So I didn't see that as abuse. You hear that sometimes, well, why would they stay? You sometimes just don't even recognize what abuse is when you're in it. And every problem in our marriage was my fault, and I know that because he told me so repeatedly. And I tried to leave a couple of times, but he just convinced me that if I would just try harder and do the right thing, then everything would be okay. And it took me 20 years to recognize that that pattern of abuse was destructive and it was tearing me apart. By the end of 2006, I'd hit rock bottom and I had no self-worth at all. I felt like I had no purpose in life at all, that even the things that I did do, someone else obviously could do better, so I really was unimportant and unnecessary. I'd contemplated suicide, and the only reason that I didn't act on it at that point was because of my children. But I did engage in self-destructive behaviors, things that were not good for me. And it's just because I felt like I didn't deserve anything better. I was just trying to get through, much like my mother did with her drugs. These behaviors were just my coping mechanisms. And finally, in May of 2007, I reached a point of total crisis, and a friend urged me to call Coastal Samaritan Counseling Center. She'd been a client prior to and had recommended their services because they'd been very helpful. And on the day that I called, I was blessed beyond belief to have Kathy available when I called. And she spent an hour and a half talking me through the worst day of my life. And that's when I became a client of the counseling center. The first thing Kathy did in the sessions that I started with was to give weight to my voice and to my feelings. Up until that point, nothing I said mattered. Nothing I felt was important because I wasn't worth it. It was the first time in my life that what I felt mattered to somebody, and it was the first time that it was okay to think about what I needed. My life was in major transition at that point. I had gone back to school to get a college degree because I had to support these children because I was going through a divorce. I was trying to figure out what my place in the world was and what my value to the world was on my own right as an individual and not as someone's mom or someone's daughter or somebody's wife. It was a big, difficult journey. It had a lot of stumbling blocks and a lot of setbacks. It was not an easy thing. But my experience at the counseling center had a profound effect on my life as I worked through it. It instilled me with a sense of value as an individual. It showed me all of the areas of my life where I was indeed successful and productive, because up to that point I didn't see any of that. It taught me that I deserved to be treated with respect. Everyone deserves that, but I didn't know that. It made me feel heard and showed me that my feelings were valued and important and that they were allowed. It helped me to understand why I made certain choices that weren't healthy for me so that I could learn how to make better choices as I moved forward. It encouraged me to explore my own areas of personal growth so that I could be a better person as I lived out. There was follow-up to ensure that I was being successful on all the things that we were implementing. And there was support if I had a time when I wasn't successful at it. There was never judgment. There was never criticism. All of my failures were even constructed as a learning experience, a way to derive something so that we know what not to do next time. At one point during my counseling treatment, I actually lost my health insurance coverage. And I was fearful that I wouldn't be able to afford to continue treatment, and at that point I realized how important it was. But the counseling center never refused my service. They worked hard with me in order to let me be able to come and continue my treatment. Unfortunately, my mother never had the ability to have treatment from a center like Coastal Samaritan. She spent her entire life from the time that she was 16 battling mental illness. She had no idea that she even had mental illness. It was completely underdiagnosed when she was of that age, and what those people that were diagnosed with it came with a huge stigma. And so my mother never got to have the treatment she needed, but I've been very blessed through Coastal Samaritan to be able to have that treatment. And from that, I've been able to evaluate and choose healthy relationships in my life, and I can limit the impact of negative people in my life. We can't get rid of negative people in our lives, but we can limit how they impact us as we move forward. I've been able to set aside my own skewed perceptions of myself, and I've begun to see myself more like other people describe me. I'm able to express my concerns in a healthy way and to see them as worthwhile concerns. I found a few people that are like accountability partners. They help me to work through problems when I have them, and they help me to find good choices in my life rather than me just trying to pull it all internally. I don't have any thoughts of suicide or utter despair anymore because I know that I can make choices that'll make me happier and stronger now. I bought into the notion for a long time that there were aspects of my personality that were flaws and shortcomings, but now I see them as personal gifts. And I understand why they're significant and why I'm blessed to have them. And I embrace them now and I nurture them because it makes me a more effective and useful person. I'm just useful in the way that I'm supposed to be rather than how someone else thought I was supposed to be. You know, Paul, again, back to Paul's words, he said, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. He wanted for all of us to have the best in our lives, the best life that we could possibly have. But for me, that means being able to maintain a strong mind and a mental health. And Coastal Samaritan has enabled me to be able to renew my mind. It's enabled me to live a happy and a healthy life. You know, my friend who sent me to the center the first day, and Kathy and the staff that are at that center, all of the volunteers who come in and help stuff envelopes and do things around the center, and everyone who's ever donated a dime to the center or donated in-kind gifts or provided for the operations of that center, they are all the Samaritans that Michael was talking about for me personally. So I just want to thank everyone who's ever done anything for Coastal Samaritan Counseling Center because you've made me a strong person today.